All right. So hello, hello. I hope you are well. And looks like I'm starting off today with just, it's Craig and I. The handy dandy recording friend, Craig. Thank you, Craig Bot. So admittedly, I accidentally somehow deleted my digital copy of the path with all my notes. So I'm not quite sure. I think this is where we left off, which is at mostly the top of page 72. And even if we didn't, I know we're around there. And this seems like a good section starter here. So starting at the path factors and their relationships. Once these supplementary factors reach sufficient strength, they give rise to the proper factors of the path. As noted above, in some cases, the supplementary factors blend into the path factors themselves. As, for example, appropriate attention becomes right view. Heedfulness, shame, and urgency become part of right effort, and powers of observation become alertness under right mindfulness. At the same time, the dynamic among the supplementary factors, in which they are mutually reinforcing to the point of shading into one another, repeats among the path factors themselves. And to my mind, this is kind of a reiteration of what Bhikkhu talked about in the introduction, and then I feel confident will be scattered throughout. This idea that the Eightfold Path and all of the kind of conceptualizations therein, if you will, they support one another. And the Buddha is quite clear, when he, again, for fear of sounding like a broken record, but, he does repeat it often, that it's, it was designed to be, followed as is. So I think here, he's explaining once again about how all of these kind of work together to facilitate the rights, to support them, to make them possible. That's what I'm taking here. So I'm not sure if that's what's meant, but okay. So this point is not apparent from the standard exposition of the path factors, which simply lists them 1 through 8, or in the suttas, setting forth a simple linear progression among the arising of the factors, with right view leading to right resolve to right speech, and so on down the line to right concentration. However, there are many other suttas that, in the course of discussing the path factors, either show alternative relationships among them or raise questions that the standard linear exposition can't explain. I like this. Okay, so yeah, the way that the Eightfold Path is presented, it definitely does look hierarchical when you look at it on a piece of paper or depicted in imagery. It does look like there are steps. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this. And it doesn't really speak to these other supplementary factors that we've been talking about the last few weeks, the other internal and external factors. And the other suttas here that are being talked about, which I look forward to reading, which also kind of support this idea. So yeah, let's get into it. The 4 issues that stand out to Bhikkhu here. Number 1, some suttas show that many of the factors, instead of leading directly to awakening, can lead simply to a good rebirth. Thus, instead of acting as transcendent kama, neither bright nor dark, in the terms of Sutta 58, they function as bright kama, leading to happiness on the mundane level in this life and the next. One prominent instance is the standard description of the Buddha's second knowledge on the night of his awakening, where he sees beings who act on right view, gaining rebirth in good destinations, Sutta 30, rather than being unbound. Another passage is Sutta 309, which describes a person who has developed a peaceful awareness release, equivalent to right concentration, but doesn't have enough right effort or right view to work further to end the ignorance that underlies all suffering. A simple linear understanding of the path factors, in which one factor automatically leads to the succeeding factors, can't explain passages like these. Again, this is where I'm out of my depth because I don't have enough knowledge base about the full lineage of the text. So I'll just suffice to say that I'm here in the spirit of beginner's mind and looking forward to continue reading. My not being native to this religion / philosophy, I recognize that there's so much that I'm going to get mired up in because of my ignorance. Like, for instance, here, this passage almost savors of Hinduism to me. This idea that, and this is where I clearly don't understand Hinduism, so is this suggesting that when so if you are born into a better condition, does that line up with this idea of a caste system? Wealth and lack of wealth? And if that ties to this, then how is this different than Hinduism? And so this is where, I sure would love some help, but I'm just gonna say when I don't know, and this is when I really, really don't know, but I find this fascinating and looking forward to continue reading. Yeah. So number 2. That's another issue that Bhikkhu mentions. Similarly, there are other explanations of the path in which the factors occur in a different order. Prominent among these are the Dhamma talks that the Buddha gave on the triple training in the last year of his life, Sutta 51, in which he states that concentration, fostered with virtue, has great fruit and great rewards, as does discernment, fostered with concentration. This puts the factors in this order: virtue, right speech, right action, and right livelihood; concentration, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration; and discernment, right view, and right resolve. Sutta 50. This divergence from the list of factors and the standard description of the Noble Eightfold Path, where right view and right resolve come first, can be explained by passages that insist on a mutually reinforcing relationship among the factors, saying, for example, that jhana needs discernment, just as discernment needs jhana, Sutta 53, or that discernment and virtue need each other in order to be purified, Sutta 52. In other words, all the factors start out weak, but support one another until they all reach enough strength to lead to awakening. This is an explanation that the Buddha himself suggests by the image of the rafters of a roof being unstable until they are firmly connected by the ridge beam of discernment. And this is Sutta 48, colon 52. This explanation makes perfect practical sense, but no strict linear understanding of the factors could provide it. I have a whole lot to say on this, again, other than this is fascinating. And I agree, it makes a lot of sense, again, just strictly from an experiential perspective, as someone who has spent time developing these concepts, developing discernment, actively developing discernment, as suggested by the Buddha, actively, working with right speech and noticing when it's not right, and actively working with right action and right livelihood, and noticing when that no longer quite feels like it aligns. And I can just say that, yeah, that makes a lot of sense that these would need to support each other. I mean, this is really hard work. And it just seems to me, what it brings to mind is there's an organization that I'm volunteering with, and we're getting ready to do a book club on a book that I'm really looking forward to reading by a woman named Caitlin Krauss called Digital Wellbeing. And I'll just say that for the book club, we're kind of having a fun little exercise that we're doing, and we're splitting the team. We're splitting the people who are participating in this book club up into 4 teams: one for emotional well-being, one for physical, one for mental, and one for social. And I don't want to spoil the game, but I'll just say that this will be a little spoiler, perhaps, that the whole idea here is that they reinforce one another. That this idea of well-being, or something that I'm studying right now, it's a psychological concept with a measurement tool, subjective well-being, right? So even if you were to go and take a look at that measurement tool, what is subjective well-being? One of the features that is considered when you're thinking about subjective well-being is something called positive affect. And this is kind of a feeling state, coupled with a sense of agency. I mean, there's various things going on here, but to my mind, if you yourself, decide to go look up subjective well-being and, maybe go down the rabbit hole and see what you can find out about what that is as a psychological framework, once again, it's not just one thing. There's several things that kind of comprise this idea of quote unquote well-being. And that's what I'm thinking of here, is that, if you study the teachings and you contemplate them and then you actively engage in these practices, you see for yourself how these leverage and support each other for your own benefit, for your own benefit in your practice, at least to my experience. So number 3, there is also the question of how, if the factors have to arise in linear order, a person could gain awakening on listening to a Dhamma talk. That's a great point, right? Because, they're not, I listen to them all out of order. I listen to them as I need them. I listen to them when I'm struggling, as a solace, as a reminder. There would be no opportunity for such a person to practice right speech or right livelihood, and not enough time to master right concentration, if none of these factors could exist without the right view that he or she gained on listening to the talk. Yeah, and I think that's a really great point, that it's kind of through developing all of these that, when you're going through the YouTube rabbit hole, right? Whatever's in your feed, whatever you've been feeding your feed, right? Going back to the aggregates, right? And this idea of we're constantly feeding the fabricated mind. Whatever you've got going on there, right? If you've been developing these internal and external factors, and the stones in the path, not independent of each other, but, organically and as needed, then wouldn't it make sense that you would more readily find a teaching, say, in YouTube that aligns with what you need, right? We can't look for what we don't know about. We can't know what we don't know. We can't find what we don't know what to look for. It's, to my mind, that's kind of what's being got at here. And then number 4, finally, there is the question raised by Sutta 319, which states that the Noble Eightfold Path is identical to the stream of stream entry, which is the first level of awakening. If this is the case, then how does a stream enterer's path differ from that of a person who reaches full awakening as an arahant? An explanation that limits the path factors to 8 cannot answer this question. Interesting, from where I'm standing, minutia that I don't feel knowledgeable enough about to really have an opinion about. But the questions seem logical to me. Yeah, I mean they seem logical to me. So and I'm sorry, I'm just going to say MN117 because I haven't memorized the Pāli names of these, so forgive me, but it's Sutta 48. Provides an alternative explanation of the path factors, however, that addresses many of these issues, giving some sense of the complexity of the relationships among the factors of the path. In fact, the picture it presents is so complex that it's easy to understand why the Buddha presented the factors more frequently in simple linear order. The simpler exposition is easier to memorize and understand. The more complex exposition then builds on this simpler exposition to present a more nuanced portrait of the practice. Even then, though, the picture provided by MN117 is incomplete. In fact, it sketches an outline that it doesn't completely fill in. Still, it provides enough information to give a more practical sense of what the path involves, at the same time offering some resolution to the above 4 questions. And I'm going to admit it, I am not, this is a great, this is a beginner's book, right? It's an introduction to the path. And so I'm looking forward to, after I complete this book, maybe continuing on with this podcast, but, getting into the primary, some of these primary teachings here. All right. Number 1, to address the issue of the mundane and transcendent results of the path factors, it divides each of the first 5 factors into 2 versions, mundane on the one hand and noble and transcendent on the other. In the case of right resolve, right speech, right action, and right livelihood, the definition of the mundane factor is identical with the definition of that factor in the standard list, Sutta 46. At the same time, only right resolve among these factors is given a transcendent noble version that differs appreciably from its standard definition, a point that we will discuss under question 2. For the other factors, the transcendent noble version simply states that once the path as a whole becomes transcendent, these factors become transcendent as well. Well, that's kind of getting back to this idea again of we can't know what we don't know. And so it sounds like he's suggesting that it's perhaps providing a path for an individual who is not, is wholly, coming in at this from an entirely different point of entry, stream entry point, another option. And again, I'm not familiar with, any of this. And so again, I'm just looking forward to getting into it. And this is really, really interesting. In the case of right view, though, the standard definition becomes the transcendent noble level of right view, whereas the mundane level of right view consists of right view about karma and rebirth. This way of recasting the factors helps to explain why the path factors lead to mundane results in some instances and to transcendent results in others. Wow, I don't know if I'm going to get this right, but I'm going to tell you what I think he's being said here, and if so, this just makes so much sense to me, and it gets to what I talked about last week, and about how I was really grappling, with what the Buddha was teaching his son Rahula, and how I was struggling to understand, how he could say on one side of his mouth, "Kiss the feet of no man," sort of, and in other words, it seemed to me that he was saying, in the one sense, look to no other. It's wholly within your own effort and practice to awaken. But then he would say, he would kind of introduce these kind of artifice, right? This kind of, look in the mirror and imagine that you're being looked on by, wise, companions. And I was confused by that. I don't get it, Buddha. What are you saying? That it's not, and I had said last episode, but that's acting as if. It's not emotionally experienced. It's not truly felt. But now I think I understand in what Bhikkhu is saying here. Well, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Okay, yeah, and I'd say yes, this idea that the mundane, in other words, you can't move to the transcendent aspect of right view until you've mastered the mundane aspect of right view, is what I'm hearing here. And I would agree, and you're probably thinking, who cares if you agree, Sarah? Who are you? I'm nobody, man. I'm nobody. Yeah, it's great. It's great to be nobody. As I've mentioned many times before, it was addiction, bulimia, primarily when I began this path that brought me here, and was suicidal at that point in my life. So this might be difficult for people to understand who've never been that desperate. I think we're beginning to understand what the Buddha taught 2,500 years ago, that everything is a part of is fabricated, which means that none of us are seeing exactly the same thing to a certain degree. I'm not saying that, objective reality doesn't exist. That's not at all what I'm saying. But, to the degree at which, we are influenced by the 5 aggregates, that all the things I'm not going to repeat, right? Because I've already said it many times before. And I think this is one of those things, and I've mentioned this before, right? That I think it would be very, very difficult to really understand and feel, to really experience emotionally, physiologically, that level of desperation unless you've actually experienced it yourself. I think that for those who have experienced that bottom place, the darkest, seemingly underbelly, right, of ourselves, then he's saying here that it's mundane, but I mean, yeah, I mean, if this is the entry point, then yeah, then for those people who've asked, do I have to have an ego death to experience this? Then the answer is yes. Your ego has to break. I mean, that's kind of what's being suggested here, at least to my view, because I just don't see how anyone could ever really, really get to and appreciate the depth and the importance, the significance of karma and rebirth otherwise. But I also understand how, if you're not fighting for your own life on some level, or you don't have this kind of driver, that terror that we talked about, right? Quite frankly, I don't see how you could possibly move beyond the mundane and into the transcendent. When we're studying and practicing for our life, as if our life depended on it, it's because it does. That's what bottoming out means, right? That's what's motivating us. That's what's keeping the fire, that implicit motivation. That's what keeps that engine running. And if you don't have a bottoming out with a drug or a blade to your wrist, well, maybe he's calling it mundane because he's saying, I don't know, it sure doesn't feel mundane. But maybe he's saying that it doesn't need to get that bad. That's what maybe is being said here is, hey, Sarah, it doesn't need to get that bad. You don't actually have to break to be able to develop some mundane right view about karma, Four Noble Truths, right, and rebirth. And again, I've told you, again, that I may have came up in a secular home, but there is. It's hard for me to put into words my relationship to rebirth. And I've spent many, many hours in teachings, particularly when I belonged to a Tibetan Buddhist community in upstate New York many, many years ago. And it's very hard to explain, right? Because you already know, if you listen to my podcast, you already know that I struggle with the idea of karma. But there's another aspect of that to my being, which is that and when I say terror, it's not like terror of a God concept. I don't have a God concept. Buddhists don't really have, the relationship to deities isn't perhaps what many people in the West might think it is. There is a certain sense of a radical right view for me about rebirth. This radical idea that what if it were true, right? I mean, and I don't want to get too bound up in that, because all of that, words and thought can absolutely be a trap. The more you practice discernment, the more readily you're going to catch yourself getting trapped in your own cognition, which is kind of not the side of the brain that we want to be in when we're working with some of these concepts. I hope that makes sense. So this way of recasting the factors helps to explain why the path factors led to mundane results. Oh, we already read. Okay, la la la. I lost my place. Delightful. Well, we'll just start right here. This suggestion is made somewhat more explicit by the canon's only other reference to noble right concentration. In AN 5:28, Sutta 296. That sutta's explanation of noble right concentration gives it a fifth factor in addition to the four jhanas, illustrating the fifth factor with a simile indicating that it involves backing away slightly from the concentration and observing it. Indeed, indeed. Oh, yes, delightful. Okay, so AN 9:36, Sutta 312, fleshes out the meaning of this simile by showing that the process of observation has to involve appropriate attention. In other words, you apply right view to comprehend the component factors of the concentration. AN 5:28 then concludes that when this process is mastered, concentration will lead to release. This means that if the terms of appropriate attention in that fifth factor deal in transcendent right view, the concentration will have a transcendent result. Wow, this makes a lot of sense. This just makes an incredible amount of sense. And it's amazing. So much of this feels so impossible to explain. And yet, clearly, it's not impossible to explain. I'm going to go back to this last section and try to bring in an analogy to help myself and, I don't know, maybe you, I don't know, by extension. In other words, you apply right view to comprehend the component factors of the concentration. So, right view, which kind of tells us what the Buddha recommended we dwell on. The kind of ideas or fabrications, maybe for lack of a better word, that are wise to hold salient. Okay, they are wise to believe, or put your faith behind, or put your practice behind. And because they're right, downstream from that, in the practice, in the practice of concentration, you drop below thought. I am going to guess that's what is being said here. Now, I don't know if that's what they mean, but I think I get it. I mean, we can apply concentration to anything. In fact, we do. We apply anytime that you catch yourself repeating an obsessive negative thought over and over and over to yourself, you are concentrating on a thought stream, right? So but that's not, I wouldn't say that what you're concentrating on is a right view, right? If you believe that you have nothing to offer, you're worthless, you don't matter, or maybe you believe you're hot shit, you're the best, other people are not nearly as intelligent as you are. Well, that is not right view, according to the Buddha. So, I mean, you're right. You could concentrate on that. Law of attraction. That's right. I said it. I'm just saying there's some aspects of the law of attraction that, and right on. I know what the law of attraction says about Buddhists, and unfortunately, I think the people who've asked Abraham Hicks about Buddhism don't know a lot about Buddhism, and so I have to assume neither does Esther Hicks, because the answers are kind of trite and never really do the legitimate question justice. But what exactly are you practicing your concentration meditation on, man? Right? And again, I realize this is just such a slippery slope. I mean, again, I am Buddhist. I decided to, practice Buddhism. I realized that there are practices out there, and there are humans that would argue here, right? And they would say there is no such thing as wrong view in relationship to concentration, right? Anywho, I'll move on. Number 2, to address the issue of the interrelationship among the factors, MN 117 makes 2 points. A, each right factor depends on a combination of 3 other factors circling around it: right view, right mindfulness, and right effort. Right view knows the right and wrong versions of the factor. Right mindfulness, in contrast to the popular understanding of mindfulness as non-reactive acceptance, remembers to abandon the wrong version of the factor and to develop the right. And right effort actually does the work of doing what right mindfulness reminds it to do. In this way, every factor contains a cluster of other factors helping it along. And the image of circling suggests a feedback loop in which the work of right effort helps to develop right view and raise it to a higher level. And that's, again, I'm no scholar, but speaking experientially, that would be a way for me to describe my experience of meditation. There's a lot going on. When you're looking at someone meditating, it doesn't look like they're doing anything at all, but there is a lot going on. When my mind wanders, particularly when it wanders to unskillful thoughts, I use tools to redirect my thought stream. Right? Redirect my thought stream. There is effort. There is effort here. And I think, again, that's being got at here. Okay, B, the transcendent version of right resolve is defined in such a way as to equate it with the first jhana. For instance, the verbal fabrications listed in the definition are the factors of directed thought and evaluation present in the first jhana. This interpretation is seconded by Sutta 164, which states that the first jhana is where unskillful resolve ceases without trace, and that the second jhana, in which directed thought and evaluation are stilled, brings about the cessation of even skillful resolves. In this way, right resolve, which is one of the discernment factors, becomes part of right concentration, and vice versa. Their mutual support becomes so thoroughgoing that the line between them gets erased. Wow, this is just remarkable. I find that Bhikkhu's just done such an incredible job of being able to articulate, again, something that, that for me, I would find difficult to describe. But again, as I just mentioned, just strictly speaking for myself, right resolve, right? So resolve, what does resolve mean? We say to ourselves, I resolve to do this. I several weeks ago, maybe a month ago, I don't know, but I started an event, on this Discord server, like several of us do. And it was just one that was going to be kind of a short-term one. It was going to be like a daily short-term event. And then I was going to do it all the way up until my birthday, which is in about 2 weeks or so, a little bit over 2 weeks. So the practice that I set up in the Discord server, turned into an event. What I committed to was getting up at 5:30 in the morning at my time and getting onto the Discord server and letting this community know that I'm going to be doing my morning practice soon, in case anybody wants to join me. And then even though I'm tired and sleepy, and some mornings I just didn't sleep well and I'm exhausted and I don't want to get up, and then other mornings I find getting up quite easy and I'm actually really looking forward to it. Almost as if on some level while I was sleeping, there was some part of me that was anticipating the practice. It changes from day to day, but the right resolve comes in, I'm going to get up no matter how I'm feeling. I'm going to get up because I made a commitment to myself. I'm resolved to see this through. I'm resolved. There's a very much an edge to the idea of resolve. I remember reading this passage in one of my mom's, she used to love this romance novelist back in the early 80s, Danielle Steele. And I just remember this line. I don't know why it stayed with me, but she had steely resolve. But there is something to that, isn't there? So there is something very steely to the idea of resolve in a way that's almost repetitive. So here it's talking about resolve. So to my mind, what could be unskillful resolves that need to cease and which will cease without a trace, right? In the first jhana. Well, if you continue to study Buddhism, then you'll know that unskillful resolve can be fed by wanting things, wanting stuff, wanting power, wanting control, wanting to manipulate, change, control external conditions, right? To manipulate and control others. There's a certain amount of egoic clinging to that, isn't there? Right? So I don't know that the Buddha would have said that's particularly skillful resolve to practice. I want to do the hard work of meditation so that I can get what I want, fuck people over, and take control. They're called psychopaths, right? They do exist. I argue, I would like to put up on offer that the Buddha would have said that that's wholly unskillful, right? Remember that there's a lot of ethics in Buddhism, a lot of ethics. So these are two of the ways in which MN 117 portrays the interrelationships among the factors of the path to indicate that they need one another to develop fully. Number 3, the distinction between mundane and transcendent factors of the path also provides an explanation for why a person can gain awakening by listening to a Dhamma talk. For they show that it's possible for people to have developed a mundane version of all the factors, while lacking simply the transcendent versions of the discernment factors. Once these people learn transcendent right view, their minds will enter the first jhana, and because the other factors have all been developed, reach awakening. Yeah, I'm sure we've all I shouldn't say I'm sure we've all, but I'd wager that if anybody is listening out there, well, I can't make that wager either because, it's all probability, right? But let's just say this. In the species called Homo sapien, there are humans that have come across a teaching. And in Buddhism, but I'd wager that this could be a teaching in any tradition, right? Any tradition. I mean, I will, again, I think I've said this many, many times, right? I'm certainly not trying to be an evangelist for Buddhism. Again, I just, that's what I do. But this idea that you're listening to a teaching of whatever it is that you practice, right? Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, a bunch of other religions that I'm too ignorant to know about right now and can't think of. Catholicism, Christianity. And maybe you've even heard the Dhamma talk, especially nowadays, right? Because we can rewatch them and rewatch them and rewatch them. Maybe you've heard a Dhamma talk and then you listen to it years later and you have an aha moment. Something gets through. It's as if you've heard it for the first time. In fact, for all you know, you might actually believe that you have heard it for the first time when you haven't, right? There's this radical kind of, it's a perception shift. And so I think, I'm guessing that that's what he's getting to here, and that if your karma is ripe, right? And if you've been developing, right? If you've been efforting and developing, I think it's a Christian expression, right? He who seeks finds. She who seeks finds. So, again, what I'm assuming here that is being got at is, if we are pursuing I don't like the word pursue, if we are embarking on this path, then the karma will ripen. You're watering. If we all, according to Buddhism, right, we all have seeds that have been planted via previous lives. And again, if you don't buy that, then just say, fine, again, whatever, helps you. If you're interested in Buddhism, again, consider that idea of, the mistakes and it's interesting choices, right, that we've made in this life. We've planted seeds, right? We can't go home again. It's just not how it works, right? So as we awaken to our own self, as we take the blinders off our own eyes, as we begin to lay down the veil of ignorance around our own machinations and behaviors, the Dhamma can reveal itself to us, right? And I'm assuming that's what's getting got at here. Number 4, MN 117 goes on to state that whereas the path of the stream enterer has 8 factors, the path of the Arahant has 10. The 2 additional factors are right knowledge and right release. Unfortunately, the sutta doesn't define those 2 added factors, and the testimony from the rest of the canon on these factors is sketchy. Perhaps the Buddha felt that once stream entry was attained, the disciple would now know the path and be able to develop it for him or herself in a way that produces the remaining 2 factors, as he suggests at the end of MN 117. Ooh, very, very cool. I like that. I'm looking forward to reading on. So MN 117 provides answers for many of the questions that other suttas in the canon raise about the standard exposition of the path. Still, there are some areas where its explanations need further fleshing out, and a few important points about the path, as reported in other suttas, that it doesn't touch on at all. Although it clearly defines the wrong version of each of the first 5 factors of the path, it doesn't provide definitions of the wrong versions of the remaining 3. Even though it provides an explanation of the reciprocal relationship among the factors, it only suggests that right view has something to learn from the other factors, without clearly stating that this is so. In fact, in line with the standard linear description of the path, it keeps repeating the point that right view comes first. This means that MN 117 doesn't fully make room for other versions of the practice, as outlined, for example, in the triple training, or the 5 faculties, where discernment comes after all the other factors of the path. So again, I don't have a whole lot to say here, again, because I just don't have enough knowledge about these other approaches and other later texts that attempted to decipher, Buddhist teachings. So again, I repeat, I look forward to reading more. Although it clearly defines the mundane and transcendent/noble versions of right view and right resolve, it doesn't show the dynamic of how the mundane level leads to the transcendent level of each factor. At the same time, it doesn't provide an explanation for the handful of sutta passages indicating a level of right view that goes beyond transcendent right view, on the verge of awakening, when, given that even transcendent right view is fabricated, right, the mind executes a turn where it lets go of right view and all the other factors of the path to reach the unfabricated. I wholly have zero opinion on this because I think opinion is where this can get so dicey. So I'm not. I've heard if I'm reading this right, if I'm interpreting this correctly, and again, I have no one to correct me, so my gosh, I hope I am. I've heard this argument before, and it's not that I have some quick and ready disagreement. It's just that, so what? I'm not quite sure what the point of it is. Where am I going with this? This idea that, if you really want to wake up, if you really, really, really want to wake up, then you kind of have to go through this whole process and then kind of let all of that go. And then that's what it really looks like. And I don't remember where turtles all the way down comes from. It's I think it might be South American. I honestly don't know. I have to look that up. I'm embarrassed. Maybe it's African. Oh my goodness. I'll have to look that up. But to my mind, that's kind of what's going on here. It's turtles all the way down. And at a certain level, just who cares? That's thought again. And to my mind, if we're getting caught up in thought, we're getting caught up in the ego, and I'm not quite sure what the point is. I'm just not quite sure that I understand what the point is of the ego at that level. It just seems irrelevant. It's that need for us to have more. What more? I need more. I need more. I need more awakening. More. But I'm not sure if that's what's getting got at here, so I don't know. Of course, it's too much to expect any one sutta to provide a complete picture of the path. This is partly because there is only so much that can be said about the path. Exactly. It's like, oh my God, why are we still doing this? And far more that can be learned only by putting the path into practice. Here, effing here. At a certain level, you just can't get there from there. You just can't get there from there, man. Just be quiet and practice. If you practice long enough, you won't feel like talking so much. I guarantee it. Yeah. Even what can be said is far too extensive for any one sutta to cover it all. As the Buddha said in MN 12, even if he were questioned for 100 years just on the topic of right mindfulness, he wouldn't come to the end of the topic. And that's only one factor out of 8. Still, there are other passages in the canon, both in the suttas and in the Vinaya, or disciplinary rules, that help to explain the above 4 points, providing a detailed overview of the path that will provide added help in practice. It's for these reasons that I have gathered these extra passages in this book. The following chapters will cover each path factor in turn, followed by a chapter on the fruits of the path. Each chapter dealing with the path factors will include passages from the canon that not only flesh out the definition of the path factor, but also define the wrong version of the factor where such passages exist, show what the factor has to learn from the other factors, and in particular from right view, and how putting the factor into practice gives lessons to the other factors, including right view, helping them to advance to the transcendent level and beyond, and show what happens to the factor as the path approaches the point where it is so fully developed that it has to be abandoned in favor of the unfabricated. And again, I don't know what that means, and I'm looking forward to finding out more. In addition, for the factors of right view and right resolve, I will also include passages indicating how to reflect and behave in such a way as to progress from their mundane to their transcendent levels, and then from the transcendent levels to the stage where they are so fully developed that they can be abandoned as a last step in reaching the goal. To provide a framework for understanding the passages, Each chapter will begin with a discussion of the major themes surrounding the topic of the chapter. These discussions will also provide recommendations for how to read and understand some of the more obscure canonical passages included there. Although these introductory discussions will focus primarily on the passages in the chapters they preface, they will also draw on passages from other chapters as a way of showing how the different path factors are interrelated. In discussing the interrelationships among the path factors, the emphasis will be on the role of fabrication. On the one hand, this means pointing out the lessons that each factor receives about fabrication from right view. On the other, it means pointing out the practical lessons on the process of fabrication that the development of each factor offers to all the other factors, and in particular to right view, helping it to develop through all its three levels: mundane, transcendent, and beyond. This emphasis on fabrication as a key to the interconnected arising of the 8 factors serves 2 purposes. One, in terms of interconnection, it shows how, in trying to skillfully fabricate a particular factor, you don't have to look at only the preceding factors on the path for help. Lessons can come from any direction, whether earlier or later in the standard description of the path. 2, in terms of fabrication, the complex interrelationships among the factors illustrate the complex causal pattern that the Buddha says underlies all action, both on the external and internal levels. Although some people have complained about the complexity of the pattern, the act of trying to develop the path is where an understanding of the pattern shows its real utility. Practice! It's because of the complexity of action that the path can arise and be developed in the first place. And it's also because of the complexity of action that a fabricated path can become a noble path by coming together in a fully developed form that leads to a noble, unfabricated goal. Marvelous. Okay, and so we've been given many, many readings here. And as you may recall from chapter 1, every chapter begins with Bhikkhu's commentary and helps us by laying down a framework. And, I definitely put my confidence and full faith and consider Bhikkhu to be, another voice. And then after that section of the chapter, he gets into the suttas. And so, we've now kind of come to the end of chapter 2's commentary. And we'll start off next week by reading the suttas for chapter 2, the discovery of the path. And I think I'll start us off by just reading the first one, Sutta 26. Monks, I have known 2 dhammas through experience: discontent with regard to skillful dhammas, and unrelenting exertion. Relentlessly, I exerted myself, thinking, in parentheses, gladly I would let the flesh and blood in my body dry up, leaving just the skin, tendons, and bones. But if I have not attained what can be reached through human firmness, human persistence, human striving, there will be no relaxing my persistence. From this heedfulness of mine was attained awakening. From this heedfulness of mine was attained the unexcelled freedom from bondage. And this is from AN 2:5. Well, I just can't think of a better way to leave this week. The radical, absolutely profound, radical practice that's being asked of us. Unrelenting exertion. He broke his own mind. Relentlessly, I exerted myself. Thinking. Exertion. Trying. Exerting. Working. Struggling. That's the mind, right? The mind trying to get in there. Just get in there and figure it fucking out, right? Gladly, I would let the flesh and blood in my body dry up. if I could just frickin' wake up. I have to assume that, we're beginning here, right? Because that was his first step. And when you think about it, if you look at things like the hero's journey, right? In any screenplay, right? Most screenplays are following, Jung and Joseph Campbell and, these ideas, well, Joseph, Carl Jung, right? The idea of the archetype, the hero, right? The Joker, death, the tower, the hangman. So the hero, right? The hero in Carl Jung's psychoanalysis, right? His idea of self-actualization and, kind of moving through these, well, it's Buddhist to some degree, only to some degree, because there is no self to actualize in Buddhism. There is no self in Buddhism. But, I think Sutta 26 here is getting to this idea that, remember, we've talked about heedfulness before now. But look at what he's saying about heedfulness. Look at what he's saying. There's a certain level of, I want this. I want this. And by gosh, I am going to do it. And when you think about movies, right? When you think about the hero's journey, when the character is finally confronted with something that forces them to make a decision. And that's the thing that kicks it from Act 1 into Act 2. Right? So to a certain degree, that's what's getting got at here. There's that impetus, there's that thirst, there's that urgency, urgency, right? From this heedfulness. So it's from this that he was able to be released from bondage. So pretty exciting stuff. All right. Well, if anybody's out there listening, thank you so much. That's another episode done and dusted. And I'll be back next week to start getting into the suttas for chapter 2. Thank you so much and be well. Take care.